Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're diving into a story so outrageous, so rich with irony you won't believe it's real. It involves a pristine $5 million mansion, an entitled HOA president consumed by jealousy, and the ultimate case of picking a fight with the wrong person. This isn't just about getting revenge. It's about a man who wrote the city's entire building code watching a neighborhood tyrant deliberately try to break every law to take him down. Our protagonist is David Carter. To his neighbors in the upscale suburban development, David is just a successful, quiet family man. He recently completed building his dream home, a stunning, perfectly designed mansion that cost him every dime of his life savings and a decade of planning. The house is flawless, built to the highest possible standards, literally. What his neighbors don't know, what they really don't know, is that David Carter is the Chief Building Officer, CBO, for the entire city and surrounding county. He oversees the codes, permits, and construction standards for every building in the region. He built his own home by the book because he wrote the book. David and his family enjoyed about 6 months of utter, peaceful bliss in their new dream home before the serpent slithered in. The serpent is Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. Karen is the queen of entitlement, a woman who wields her HOA position like a dictatorial crown. She hated David's house from the start, not because it violated anything, but because it was too grand, too new, too perfect, and it stole the spotlight from her own, slightly smaller, slightly older home that had previously been the crown jewel. The initial skirmishes were petty, classic Karen stuff designed to test his boundaries, fines for unapproved law narration, a demand that he change the precise shade of his mailbox. David, busy with his demanding job, simply paid the fines and ignored the harassment, treating it like annoying background static. But Karen never gets bored when power is on the line. She needs control, and David's magnificent, quiet defiance was a challenge she couldn't ignore. She upped the ante. She started sending photographers to take pictures of his roof and foundation, claiming she was gathering evidence. One Tuesday morning, David received a certified letter from the HOA's high-powered law firm. The envelope was thick, heavy with expensive legal jargon, and reeked of intimidation. David opened it in his home office, and the contents brought his easygoing demeanor to a chilling stop. The letter was a formal declaration, disguised as a legal notice. The HOA had unilaterally deemed David's entire mansion an illegal structure that supposedly violated an obscure covenant, Section 4.1b, which governed height and setback restrictions. The letter stated that the structure was unacceptable and, in clear, bold language, demanded, the structure must be demolished within 60 days. The final sentence was a hammer blow. Should you fail to comply, the Homeowners Association will execute a forced demolition and place a lien on your property for all costs incurred, including attorney and demolition fees. Karen Whitmore, with a stroke of her pen, was threatening to bulldoze David's $5 million dream home. Can you even imagine that? Being told to demolish the home you poured your life savings, heart, and career expertise into? What would you do? Seriously, tell me in the comments below, because David was absolutely furious, but that fury was controlled by his engineer's mind. David didn't panic. He went straight to the source. He pulled out his own set of blueprints, signed and certified by the city's top engineers, his team, and cross-referenced them with the HOA's covenants. He found Section 4.1b, the covenant set the maximum height at 35 feet. David's home was exactly 34 feet, 9 inches, a perfect legal clearance. His setbacks were perfect. His mansion was perfectly legal. Karen was lying. David immediately knew two things. First, Karen was operating on pure fraud, and second, she had somehow corrupted the HOA board and her expensive lawyers to initiate this massive, baseless demolition action. This wasn't petty, this was full-blown corporate sabotage designed to collapse his finances and seize his land. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps us make more videos like this. Instead of hiring a private lawyer, which would cost months and thousands of dollars, David did something much smarter. He went to his actual office. He filed an immediate, highly confidential request, full, untraceable access to all past and present building permits, zoning applications, and inspection reports filed by the Whitmore residents and the HOA's development firm. He put his own team on a silent, unofficial investigation. He was going to fight her, but he was going to fight her on his turf, the deep, cold world of municipal law and building code compliance, an area where he was the unquestioned master. He was going to use his position not to cheat, but to expose the depth of her corruption and her network. He was going to turn every one of her rules into a deadly legal weapon against her. But Karen, blind to the identity of the man she was targeting, wasn't going to wait 60 days. Her arrogance and impatience were about to escalate this from a ridiculous legal threat into a dangerous physical intrusion. She thought David was a scared, rich man. She was about to find out he was the most dangerous legal opponent she could ever face. The battle was set, and the first physical blow was about to be struck by the HOA in the darkest hour of the night. David's biggest strength wasn't his wallet, it was his access to information. While Karen Whitmore was busy drafting her next threatening letter, David was pulling every official document related to her. He found a strange pattern of harassment that went far beyond his house. But first, the immediate fight. Karen wasn't going to wait 60 days. She started her campaign of harassment, designed to make David's life miserable and force him to sell before the demolition crew even showed up. The next day, David received a barrage of petty fines, not just one or two, but 6 different notices, all targeting aspects of his house that were perfectly up to code, or more accurately up to the code David himself had written. Violation 1. Unapproved color for roof tiles. Fine $500 day. David's tiles were a standard gray approved by the entire city planning board. Violation 2. Excessive height of hedge adjacent to common area. Fine $300 day. David's hedge was exactly 4.5 feet high. The bylaw permitted 5 feet. Violation 3. Improper storage of refuse receptacles. Fine $400 day. Karen claimed David's hidden trash cans were visible from space. This was typical Karen warfare, overwhelming the victim with nonsense to drain their time and money. David, however, was delighted. Every fabricated fine, every ridiculous rule citation was another piece of evidence confirming Karen's malicious intent. He saved every document, meticulously documenting the discrepancy between the actual city code and Karen's bogus HOA rules. But here's where things got really strange. David discovered the reason for the renewed focus on his house. A scheduled, aesthetic compliance walkthrough led by Karen herself. This was a public event designed to humiliate him in front of the neighborhood, painting him as the problem homeowner. The day of the walkthrough arrived. David stayed inside, watching the spectacle from his second-floor window. Karen led a small, nervous group of neighbors and 2 paid HOA inspectors around his property. Karen, in an immaculate suit and sunglasses, pointed aggressively at his chimney, his siding, and his porch pillars. "Look at this monstrosity," she declared to the group, loud enough for David to hear even through the insulated glass. "The sheer height is visually assaulting. It doesn't match the traditional, classic aesthetic of our community. We must protect our property values." Karen then marched up to his front door and taped a new, enormous, laminated notice to the wood. "Do not occupy. Structure fails aesthetic and structural standards. Demolition pending." She was acting as if she were the CBO issuing an official red tag on his house. What would you do if your HOA president tried to red tag your fully legal home just to humiliate you? Would you explode or stay cool? Tell me in the comments below. David did not explode. He calmly went to his basement, accessed his confidential CBO files, and printed 2 documents. The first document was the original city permit for his house, signed and stamped by the city's highest authority, proving every inch of his home was legal. The second document, however, was the real weapon. David had spent the morning tracing the history of Karen's own house. Discovered that Karen's slightly older, slightly smaller house, the one she claimed was the standard for the neighborhood, had undergone a major extension 10 years prior. David pulled the original permit and the final inspection report. He found it immediately, a crucial discrepancy in the setback measurement for her garage extension. The extension was built 2.5 feet into the mandated common easement, making her own structure technically illegal according to the very city codes she was citing. Karen was threatening to bulldoze his legal, $5 million home over an imaginary 3-inch violation, while her own property had a very real, very illegal 30-inch encroachment onto community land. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps us make more videos like this. David realized Karen wasn't just driven by jealousy, she was driven by desperation. Why? Because the very building codes she enforced, a CBO would instantly demolish her own garage extension. She had to destroy his house first to establish a precedent of aesthetic compliance before anyone questioned the structural compliance of her own illegal expansion. This realization turned the war personal and professional. David wasn't just going to fight Karen's lawsuit. He was going to use his position to investigate the entire history of her power and her property. The next stage would involve illegal entry and an attempt to physically sabotage David's house. Karen was about to stop sending papers and start sending henchmen. David was done with paper. Karen Whitmore had escalated the war into a realm that required physical security and absolute proof of malice. David knew she wouldn't stop with simply harassing him. She had to destroy his house's integrity to justify her outrageous demolition demand. His job as the chief building officer required him to keep a level head, but his internal engineer's alarm bells were screaming. David installed a hidden commercial-grade surveillance system around his property, linking it directly to a secure server at his work office, a system the HOA lawyers could never access. The HOA's next move came quickly, proving David's paranoia was actually foresight. One evening, around 1:00 a.m., David's private system flashed an alert, motion detected rear perimeter. He raced to his monitor. The high-definition infrared footage showed a dark-colored utility van, unmarked, slowly pulling up to the back of his property. Two figures, dressed in black work uniforms, slipped out. One of them was carrying tools, shovels, and pry bars. They weren't there to admire the landscaping. They were there to sabotage his home. The figures quickly moved toward David's backyard, specifically the area near his finished basement foundation. David watched in cold fury as they began to dig. They weren't digging deeply, but were strategically disturbing the compacted soil right along the perimeter of the foundation. They were trying to create a weak spot, hoping to cause water intrusion or settlement issues that would allow them to claim the structure was unstable. But here's where things got really strange. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps us make more videos like this. As David watched the figures work, one of them moved into the light cast by a hidden motion sensor. David gasped. The figure was the HOA's paid structural inspector, a man named Gary, whom Karen had hired to file false reports against David's house. The second man looked familiar, too. He was the same contractor who was always doing maintenance on Karen Whitmore's own house. This wasn't a random act. This was direct, orchestrated sabotage. David quickly called the police. Not the local police. He called the non-emergency dispatch line for the county sheriff, citing a trespass and property damage incident involving organized criminals, which put the investigation immediately above the local jurisdiction the HOA often influenced. The police arrived quickly, their lights flashing. The two figures bolted, dropping their tools and scrambling back into their van. The sheriff's deputies quickly apprehended them just as they were trying to flee the neighborhood. The next morning, David was at the sheriff's office, pressing charges. Gary, the structural inspector, confessed under pressure, admitting Karen Whitmore had paid them $5,000 to soften up the foundation to create a liability issue. This was the irrefutable evidence David needed, proof of conspiracy, trespass, and malicious intent to destroy property. But the police still didn't know who David was. He simply introduced himself as David Carter, the victim and homeowner. He didn't use his CBO title yet. The judge was still setting his trap. The news of the arrest spread like wildfire through the HOA. Karen Whitmore, now terrified, went into overdrive, doubling down on her demolition threat. She quickly filed an emergency motion with the court, requesting an immediate restraining order against David, claiming he was harassing her. What would you do if your HOA president tried to destroy your foundation and then filed a restraining order against you? Tell me in the comments below. This escalation moved the case out of the petty HOA realm and straight into the highest levels of civil and criminal court. David knew he had all the evidence he needed to destroy Karen. The forged demolition notice, the evidence of her own illegal structure, and now, the sworn confession of her hired saboteur. However, David realized he couldn't drop the hammer yet. He needed to understand Karen's entire network. She was too powerful to be working alone. Who was the corrupt board member voting with her? Who was the lawyer who signed off on the fraudulent demolition letter? Using his confidential CBO access, David started pulling the public records for the HOA's development firm, looking for any recent projects that Karen had approved. He found a massive, recent permit for a new, high-density condo project right next to the HOA boundary, a project that had been approved suspiciously quickly, despite lacking key zoning requirements. David traced the developer, and the blood drained from his face. The developer of that massive condo project wasn't just some company. It was the firm belonging to David's own former mentor, a man he respected deeply and who had vouched for David's integrity when he took the CBO job years ago. The forgery and the corruption weren't just about David's house. They were part of a much larger scheme to illegally push through a massive project that would make the HOA millions, and Karen was the gatekeeper. The betrayal was closer to home than he ever imagined. The moment of truth was coming, and David was about to find out that his most trusted confidant was now his most dangerous enemy. The quiet revenge was about to turn into a public war against the people he once trusted. David now understood the true motive. It wasn't about his $5 million mansion. It was about the $50 million condo development his mentor, Mr. Harrison, was pushing. Karen Whitmore was simply eliminating a potential obstacle, David's house, and silencing the chief building officer by forcing him to fight a personal war. David didn't confront Harrison immediately. He went back to his office, the CBO's office, and used his full authority for the deepest, most meticulous investigation of his career. He wasn't just checking permits, he was checking the integrity of the system he was sworn to protect. He focused on the Harrison Development Group's permit application for the massive Oak Haven condos. The project was huge, right on the edge of the HOA boundary, and had been approved suspiciously fast. David pulled the final approved packet, and there it was, the smoking gun. The permit required a crucial easement from the HOA to expand the sewage and utility lines. David found the approval letter signed by Karen Whitmore as HOA president, but that wasn't the fraud. The fraud was in the zoning change. The condo development was significantly taller and denser than the area's zoning allowed. David tracked the zoning variance request and found it had been approved after a single, rushed meeting with the City Planning Commission. David pulled the original, signed documents presented to the commission. He saw it, a forged signature on a crucial engineering assessment, and a doctored environmental report that dramatically underrepresented the project's impact on local wetlands. David recognized the handwriting on the assessment immediately. It belonged to a low-level former colleague of Harrison's, but the entire document was a fabrication. The approval was based on falsified data. The corruption was immense. Karen Whitmore, in exchange for personal wealth, likely a massive, untraceable payout from Harrison, was using her HOA power to grease the wheels for a fraudulent project that would make her mentor millions, ruin the local wetlands, and overcrowd the neighborhood. But here's where things got really strange. David used his CBO credentials to quietly summon the low-level former colleague who confessed everything. He admitted that Karen Whitmore was the one who approached him, offered him a large cash sum, and provided the forged documents necessary to fool the City Planning Commission. He testified that Karen was the active intermediary, acting as the bridge between Harrison's money and the city's corrupt process. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps us make more videos like this. This confirmed that Karen was a professional criminal operating under the guise of an HOA president. David now had all the evidence for a full prosecution. Karen's criminal sabotage, confession from the man she hired to damage David's foundation. Karen's financial fraud, proof she was accepting bribes for the illegal zoning variance. Karen's legal fraud, the forged demolition notice, and the evidence of her own illegal garage extension. David had spent weeks gathering evidence, but he hadn't yet filed a single lawsuit or used his CBO title publicly. He was waiting for the perfect, devastating moment. That moment was the emergency hearing Karen had successfully called for. She was trying to secure a temporary restraining order, TRO, against David, claiming he was harassing her and obstructing her HOA duties. She thought the court would rule in her favor and give her the legal hammer she needed to force David to stop fighting. David, however, was preparing for that hearing. He was going to walk into that courtroom not as David Carter, the intimidated homeowner, but as the chief building officer, ready to expose the entire criminal network, including his mentor, Harrison. What would you do in that moment? Would you file your own lawsuit immediately, or would you wait until the last possible second to spring the trap? Tell me in the comments below. David's plan was simple, audacious, and perfectly legal. He was going to let Karen and her lawyers lie under oath one final time. He was going to let his mentor, Harrison, sit in the gallery, confident in his power. And then, at the moment of maximum tension, David was going to reveal his true identity, not just to save his house, but to shut down the entire criminal condo project and restore integrity to the city he served. The final, epic showdown was about to begin. The small, tense courtroom was packed. This wasn't the showdown. This was Karen's final attempt to silence David through the judicial system. She was seeking a TRO, claiming David was obstructing her HOA duties and intimidating her with frivolous complaints. Karen Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her two expensive, arrogant attorneys. David sat alone, representing himself, his calm demeanor infuriating Karen. Karen's lead attorney began, dramatically painting David as an erratic, malicious homeowner who was desperate to avoid compliance. They presented the stack of unpaid HOA fines and the demolition notice, making David look like a scofflaw. Then came the shocking twist, the betrayal that David hadn't fully anticipated. Karen's attorney called their first witness, Alan, the original architect who had designed David's $5 million dream home. Alan walked to the stand, looking uncomfortable. He was a long-time professional acquaintance of David's, a man who had worked closely with David on the CBO review process for years. "Mr. Allen," Karen's attorney began, "can you confirm that during the design of Mr. Carter's residence, he repeatedly pressured you to make changes that would exceed HOA height covenants?" Allen shifted nervously and answered, "Yes. Mr. Carter often insisted on height changes that I warned him were borderline. He knowingly pushed the limits." The courtroom gasped. David stared at Allen, feeling a profound sense of personal and professional betrayal. Allen was directly lying under oath, invalidating David's perfect compliance. Karen looked at David with a triumphant smirk. The testimony was clearly fabricated to make the judge believe David was an arrogant rule-breaker. But here's where things got really strange. David, acting as his own counsel, stood up for the cross-examination. He didn't question Allen about the height. He went straight for the heart of the conspiracy. "Mr. Allen," David asked, his voice calm and precise, "when the defendant, Ms. Whitmore, contacted you last month, did you tell her the exact height of my house was 34 feet? 9 inches? Allen swallowed hard. I may have discussed the final measurements. And did Ms. Whitmore or anyone on the HOA board offer you a substantial contract for design work on the Oakhaven condos, the project owned by Harrison Development, just 3 days before you agreed to testify that my house was non-compliant?" Allen froze. His eyes flickered toward the back of the courtroom, where Mr. Harrison, David's former mentor, was seated watching the proceedings. "Objection." Karen's lawyer roared. "Relevance, this is harassment." "No, Your Honor," David countered, now pointing at the HOA's legal team. "This is conspiracy. This witness is trading fraudulent testimony for future business tied to a project he knew was approved via forged permits." David then presented the court with a printout of the Oakhaven condo contract, clearly showing Allen's firm as the new lead architect, signed by Harrison after David filed his initial complaints. Allen, seeing his massive future income stream vanish, broke down. He admitted that Karen Whitmore had personally orchestrated the bribe to frame David and silence the CBO. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps us make more videos like this. Allen's confession of bribery and conspiracy was the ultimate betrayal for Karen and Harrison. Karen's TRO crumbled instantly. The judge, now seeing the true corruption, dismissed Karen's motion and asked David if he intended to pursue charges against the witness. David, looking directly at Allen, simply said, "No, Your Honor. The city attorney will handle the official action against all co-conspirators." The stage was set. Karen's petty demolition threat had led to a massive fraud conspiracy, and David had proof that his own professional circle was corrupt. He had defeated the TRO, but he hadn't yet filed his own lawsuit, nor had he revealed his identity. He walked out of the courtroom, passing his former mentor, Mr. Harrison, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. David was ready for the final, devastating move. He was going to turn the demolition threat not on Karen's house, but on her entire fraudulent condo project. The time for being Mr. Carter, the homeowner, was over. The time for the chief building officer to clean house was now. We left off with David Carter, the chief building officer, exposing the corruption of his former colleague, Allen, and forcing the collapse of Karen Whitmore's legal case. David had all the evidence of conspiracy and fraud, but he still hadn't revealed his true identity. The time for quiet, defensive maneuvering is over. It's time for the ultimate reveal. The final act of the conspiracy was scheduled for the following week. A crucial city planning commission hearing to ratify the illegal zoning variance for the Oakhaven condos, the project owned by David's mentor, Mr. Harrison, that Karen Whitmore was pushing. If this project passed, the entire fraud would be cemented. Karen Whitmore, humiliated but not yet arrested, and Mr. Harrison, sweating bullets, were both present, ready to make their final case for the project. City council chambers were packed with concerned homeowners and media. The Planning Commission chairman opened the floor for public objections to the Oakhaven condos project. Karen Whitmore's lawyer spoke first, delivering a rehearsed, confident speech, claiming the project was environmentally sound and fully compliant. Then, David Carter's name was called to the podium. He walked up, carrying nothing but a manila folder, his posture changing from the quiet homeowner to the ultimate authority figure. "Thank you, Madam Chair," David began, his voice calm, clear, and commanding. He didn't introduce himself as David Carter, the homeowner. My name is David Carter, and I am not here as a homeowner. I am here as the chief building officer for this city, speaking on a matter of public integrity. The room exploded. Karen Whitmore physically jumped in her seat, staring at David with a look of absolute horror. Mr. Harrison, seated directly behind her, turned ghostly pale. The entire commission, who worked for David's department, looked at him in stunned silence. David let the chaos subside, then continued, using his CBO authority. Madam Chair, I must object to this hearing continuing. The Oakhaven Condos project must be immediately red-flagged and halted on the grounds of systemic fraud, conspiracy, and the submission of falsified documents. He then opened his folder and began his presentation. Not a homeowner's plea, but an official indictment of the entire process, using his access and expertise. The forgery. David presented the original and the forged environmental impact reports side by side, pointing out the technical differences and the specific points that violated state and federal wetlands codes. He stated clearly that the project was fundamentally illegal. The sabotage link. He then connected the illegal condo project directly to Karen Whitmore's HOA. Ms. Whitmore, he stated, looking directly at her, attempted to have my home demolished and physically sabotaged my foundation in a direct effort to silence the chief building officer who would inevitably expose this fraud. The authority. David confirmed that, as CBO, he had been legally served the demolition notice by Karen's HOA. You threat to bulldoze my perfectly legal $5 million home over an imaginary 3-inch violation, while your own garage is built 2 feet onto community land, and this illegal condo project violates state law. The person you were harassing was the person with the legal authority to condemn your entire operation. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button. It really helps us make more videos like this. The commission, now terrified of approving a fraudulent project exposed by their own CBO, immediately voted to halt the Oakhaven Condos project and ordered a full internal investigation into the bribery allegations. Mr. Harrison, seeing his millions evaporate, stood up and tried to flee the room. But David was ready. 2 county officers, quietly waiting outside, met Harrison at the door and escorted him away for questioning regarding wire fraud and conspiracy. Karen Whitmore, completely broken, simply put her head in her hands, her arrogance replaced by the cold dread of inevitable ruin. She had sued the most powerful building code authority in the city, committed crimes against him, and in doing so had collapsed her entire criminal network. The showdown was complete. But the final, most satisfying piece of justice was yet to be delivered. The formal ruling that would permanently shut down the HOA and address the aesthetic demolition notice she had served David. That final piece of paper was about to be signed by the one person whose authority Karen Whitmore could never question. The ultimate moment of justice has arrived. David Carter, the chief building officer, just revealed his identity, exposed the massive condo fraud scheme, and watched his corrupt former mentor and Karen Whitmore arrested or investigated. The entire HOA structure has been exposed as a criminal enterprise. This is the final part, the resolution, where David secures his ultimate, lasting victory. The City Planning Commission hearing was a total wipeout for Karen Whitmore and her allies. David's reveal as the chief building officer, CBO, provided the final undeniable proof that the condo project was a fraud and the HOA was operating illegally. Harrison was gone, the condo project was shut down, and the entire HOA board was under investigation. But David's personal revenge needed one last legal signature. The core of the conflict was Karen's ridiculous, fraudulent demolition notice. Tear down your $5 million mansion or we will do it for you. A few days after the hearing, David received a summons for the final, original civil case. The HOA's demand for his home's demolition. David didn't hire a lawyer. He walked into the small civil courtroom alone. Karen Whitmore's lawyers, now terrified and facing their own disbarment proceedings for conspiracy, immediately moved to withdraw the case. Your Honor, David said, stepping forward, his voice firm. I object to the withdrawal. The plaintiff, the HOA, served me a formal demolition notice on a building they claimed was illegal. I demand a final, formal ruling on the legality of my structure, as determined by the chief building officer of this city. The judge, who had been following the news and knew exactly who David was, nodded slowly. Mr. Carter's objection is sustained. The court demands a final ruling on the structural legality of 1421 Oakmont Drive. David didn't argue. He walked to the bench, placed a sealed manila folder before the judge, and said, Your Honor, this is the final certified certificate of occupancy for my residence, along with the full engineering schematics proving 100% compliance with all city and county codes. The judge looked at the documentation, all signed, sealed, and issued by the CBO's office, and slammed his gavel. Case dismissed. The structure at 1421 Oakmont Drive is fully compliant and legal. But David wasn't done with the demolition notices yet. David then approached the bench again and handed the judge a second, different folder. Your Honor, I now submit a formal notice of noncompliance regarding the structure owned by the former HOA president, Karen Whitmore, at 1423 Oakmont Drive. The room gasped again. This was the final, devastating counterpunch. David had the CBO's office issue a formal notice confirming the illegal 30-inch encroachment of Karen's garage extension onto common area property, the very encroachment she was trying to cover up by attacking David's house. As the chief building officer, David stated, looking directly at Karen's empty defense table, I have issued a final, non-negotiable demolition order for the illegal portion of Ms. Whitmore's garage. She must demolish the structure within 30 days and restore the common area, or the city will execute the demolition and bill her for the costs. David had taken her own weapon, the demolition threat, and used the power of his office to strike at her most vulnerable spot. If you're enjoying this story of legal karma, hit that like button to show your support. The aftermath was absolute. Karen Whitmore faced criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and suborning perjury. She had to sell her home immediately to cover her mounting legal fees, but before the sale, she was forced to pay for the demolition of her own garage extension. Her dream of luxury power ended with her having to tear down her own property. As for the community, David used his influence and expertise to help the remaining homeowners dissolve the corrupted HOA entirely, replacing it with a cooperative POA focused only on maintenance, free from predatory power. David Carter returned to his quiet life in his legal, magnificent $5 million mansion, his reputation restored, and his community's soul saved. He proved that when the petty tyrants think they are above the law, the quiet man who writes the rules can bring the entire fraudulent system crashing down. Thank you for tuning into HOA Nightmares. We'll be back here very soon with a brand new, terrifying tale. I'll see you in the next nightmare.